Hey everyone, it's Raghu. I'm back with Mindrolling, and another brand new person who probably isn't that brand new at all, and Michael Gungor. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
And yeah, there's so many interesting bifurcations here in our lives, and you have one big whopper as far as I'm concerned. And certainly we have to thank Pete Holmes.
Yeah,
We have as a mutual friend.
Pete's
Yeah,
an amazing guy.
yeah, Pete is that. So, but yeah, let's just catch us up in terms of this really powerful transition from how you grew up, and of course we all had that, but you seem to have seamlessly woven it all together in a really cool way. So yeah, a little bit of background, you from your teenage years to finding
Yeah,
a way that there is a path.
yeah. So I grew up a pastor's kid, an evangelical Christian pastor's kid, who was all about Jesus, all about um, making sure that I lived a life that was pleasing to God, and I was all in. I was really like I was the kid that was the good kid in the youth group. I was, I didn't smoke or cuss or date or anything. I was like the fundamentalist gold star. I played in the praise band and all that.
Where was this?
And this was in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't see that until later how so much of that fervor in my faith was really, it was trying to fix myself. I had a lot of shame. Now that I look back, I know a lot of it was just body, like we were raised in the way that our flesh was seen as kind of bad, and our any desire, like sexual desire or lust, all that kind of stuff was like, oh, and I had to defeat the flesh, and I felt like I wasn't good enough.
None of us are really good at that.
Yeah. I think the mental illness term for it these days is scrupulosity. But I was very dedicated to repenting all the time and making sure I was right. Anyway, that got tiring, needless to say, over the years. That constant I'm not good enough really didn't work out very well, especially as my faith started to deconstruct as I went to college and started reading beyond my own camp and my own stories, and kind of seeing how some of the stories that I was handed were pretty small. So I ended up losing my faith. All that while I was kind of becoming this Christian musician on the scene, and the like it was Grammy nominations and traveling the world and playing big places. All the while kind of doubting, is any of this real? What am I doing here?
How did I get here? Yeah.
How did I get here? And then after losing my faith, kind of went through a season of enjoying not thinking about God very much. I'd had like some mystical experiences towards the end of my Christian journey. I went to like a meditation retreat in Assisi, Italy, and I started meditating, but I didn't have anybody in my life, or hadn't read anything to make sense of what that experience was. That kind of experience of oneness, and everything was. I just kind of felt the connection of everything, and that wasn't part of my lexicon. It wasn't part of my world. It wasn't part of my community. I didn't know what it was. I felt maybe I was crazy, but I loved it. I kind of kept seeking it, and that seeking brought me through a lot of different kind of places, including finding Ram Dass and his teachings, and Alan Watts, and all sorts of different non-dual teachers, and that led me on a journey. Eventually, I took some psychedelic mushrooms with a shaman. Had a crazy experience with that, and basically just eventually, as oneness kind of stabilized, I'd had these high experiences, and then especially that shamanic journey, I kind of saw through the ego in a way that it wasn't, I wasn't able to go back to really believe the ego as separate anymore. Um, even though the ego would pop its head up and try to, it'd get pissed when the flight attendant would tell me to put my guitar up in the overhead bin sometimes. I mean, that I couldn't put my guitar up in the overhead bin.
Yeah, right.
And then Michael Gungor would come screaming back, baby. But that sense of oneness and unity, and I began to find it in all the great traditions, including the tradition that I grew up with, maybe not so much in the very narrow stream of it. But if you look deep enough, there's people in all the traditions that were saying the thing. And
were the thing.
And were the thing. Yeah. And so it's brought me on quite a journey. It hasn't always been easy sailing, as all of that has changed, and I've walked away from so much. And then our old music fans are like, what are you talking about now? Like, what the hell are you talking about?
Oh yeah, tell me about that. So you completely, as you evolved in this way that you're speaking of, the music evolved. How did the music evolve in terms of just the words, or what are we talking about?
I feel like all of the music evolved. I don't know. I think the way we make art, it comes out of our most fundamental stories about reality, even in ways that are hard to articulate or hard to perceive exactly one-to-one. How, when I stopped believing that the world was 6,000 years old, that was towards the end of high school, but which is old, which is old. but how that little shift, how does that change how I create in this universe that all of a sudden is not this tiny little human-centric place? Again, I think it's hard to maybe tie direct lines to here's how the art musically changed, but it did every step of the way as my heart and my soul and stopped clinging down to this tiny, tiny sliver of reality. I think all the music and including the lyrics, just continually expanded as well.
Yeah. It's really pretty fascinating to me. It's such a striking evolvement from one thing to another, and the way in which you express, you've come full circle, and it's all one woven fabric now. But do you know kind of what happened to us when a bunch of us went back to India with Ram Dass when he went back the second time and met Neem Karoli Baba? One of the central themes, you go back, Hindu guru, you want to get a mantra. So Krishna, you know who Krishna Das is, I think. And he tells a story that he's made it his own, which I take umbrage at. So it's when I was first there, literally probably not more than a week or two, I thought, okay, it's time to get some practice from Hindu guru. So it was like I wanted to ask for a mantra, right? Which seemed normal and totally traditional. But somehow I said, Maharaji, how should I meditate? Okay. And he said, meditate like Christ. When he was on the cross, there was no pain. He was lost in love with every sentient being. And of course, wait, no, that's just a little mantra would have been good. Not that, whatever that is. Not to mention, hey, I'm Jewish. I don't know anything about Christ. Zero. I also got brought up in a sort of not quite what you did with Christianity, but certainly conservative. Certainly my teachers in grade school, where I was studying half in Hebrew and half in English, if you can imagine such a thing, which totally ruined me for school. Basically, I never went to school, I have to say. But uh, so in that moment, it was stark how far away that was from my experience for him to say something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And especially where we're in the middle of the Himalayas in an ashram.
Mm-hmm.
And Ram Dass came that day. Now, he wasn't there, but he returned from somewhere that night. And I said, listen, this is what happened, but you have a more convivial relationship with Maharaji. Can you ask him, how did Christ meditate? So we went back the next day. Half a dozen of us sitting around him. And Ram Dass said, you said meditate like Christ. How did he meditate? And then Neem Karoli Baba, just went back, closed his eyes, and it was just silent for a while. And that alone was a very powerful experience, being with somebody who wasn't living in duality.
Mm.
And being in that sphere was extraordinary and very powerful. And then suddenly 2 tears came from his eyes, and he opened his eyes, and he over and over and over said, you don't understand. You don't understand. He never died.
Mm.
He said that over and over. He never died. He was lost in love with every sentient being. He sacrificed himself for everyone. And we who were sitting there, it was as if you were a little kid, and your parents crying, you have no idea. We were like blown away that this was happening. And basically, he was manifesting whatever the Christ is,
Mm-hmm.
which is whatever it's this. The name of this wonderful book Michael just put out and wrote, called This. And yeah, it's a new name for the ineffable. How about that?
Yeah. Another name.
Yeah, another name. And so that began a journey for us of, okay, this isn't about Hinduism, Christianity,
Yeah.
being a Muslim, being a Buddhist, being anything. We have this wonderful new movie called Becoming Nobody from Ram Dass that's coming out actually shortly in September. And in it, Ram Dass says, after he describes his experience with Neem Karoli Baba, and he just trails off at one point and said, he really wasn't anybody, because there wasn't a somebody in there, and which is the theme of this whole movie. So you going through what you did, just talk about, so you started to really absorb other Eastern traditions, really, at this point?
Yeah, but strangely, in the place that I was, and thanks to Ram Dass and what I would hear from him about what Maharaji would teach and stuff, that was actually the first time that I would hear people talking about Jesus in several years in a way that I wasn't like nauseous, like I would get triggered when I would hear about Jesus, because I had this whole idea that Jesus was this guy that, he was supposed to be a loving guy and stuff, but he said stuff that really didn't fit the vibe that we all wanted him to have. He was supposed to be this loving teacher who told us how to go to heaven when we died. But when you really looked at what he said, it didn't make much sense with that if that's what he was doing. If he was here to tell us how to go to heaven when we died, and he really did kind of a shitty job. Like he kept saying really confusing things and telling these stories.
Wait, what? Tell me, because
okay, so let's say, when a rich guy walks up to him and says, when he just straight up asks him, how do I inherit the kingdom of heaven? And if my faith had been true, the true answer would have been, well, you believe in me and you invite me into your life, into your heart, you repent of your sins, and then you can go to heaven. But he looked at him and looked at his scenario and said, you have to sell everything you have and give it to the poor. What kind of answer is that? But then he didn't tell everybody else that. He told this rich guy that was his attachment. That's what was holding him back from being this, right? That's what was holding him back from being his true self, was he had constricted with his attachments to his belongings and his identity in that. Thing after thing that Christ says, he'd say, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. I came to divide family from your parents. Like, these were all things that were totally opposite of what we believe, but it just didn't make sense. He just kind of like, he was a little mysterious. All his parables, why is he teaching in parables all the time? But then when I first heard Ram Dass speaking about Christ, it was like, it was almost like I've heard this. I think first guy I heard this example from was Brian McLaren, but he talked about how you have all these puzzle pieces in a puzzle, and if you don't know what the box top is, those puzzle pieces are really kind of useless, right? Like if you don't have an idea of what the puzzle is, you can't. They're just pieces. And so we had all these pieces of Jesus's sayings and what he said, and it didn't really fit together. But it's because we had this box top idea of what Jesus was that just totally was wrong. And so hearing it through this new lens of oneness, of not Jesus being some special guy that we're supposed to believe in so that he can get us into heaven, but Jesus inviting us into our fullest self, and Jesus inviting us into himself. And he would say, I am one with the Father. I and the Father are one. May you and I be one as well. And I'm the vine, and you are the branches. And he would say it, and we were just like, and then we'd scratch our head, and then he would say, you don't understand what I'm talking about. And then when I was a Christian, we'd read that, and we'd be like, yeah, they don't understand what you're talking about.
Exactly. And it's what Maharaji in that moment said the same thing. Essentially, you just don't understand. You don't understand.
Exactly.
You don't understand what it is to be completely at one and interconnected with everything that's manifest in this world.
Yeah. Because it's not something that you can understand, is it? And like if you've understood it, now it's something that you're looking at that's not yourself. Now it's an object out there.
Yeah, exactly. It's once you're in subject-object land, which we all are, and there's no chance whatsoever to really experientially know what these beings are talking about, Christ and Maharaji. There's no way on earth. But it points us in a direction. We have again, I'm referring to this movie. It's a little bit of self-promotion here, but the reality is, I talk about, because people say, what is becoming nobody? And I give, the nth degree, right? The highest level is our experience of Neem Karoli Baba. There was no subject-object duality thing going on there. So it was extraordinary to be in that space where you're not in that usual relational thing with another human being, where there's a back and forth going on, where there's maybe judgments going on, there's projections going on, there's desire going on. There's so many different things going on for the most part. But in this case, there was nothing. But that's rare in these kinds of beings being in a body. That is a rare thing. But then take somebody, and I give an example of Ram Dass, for instance, where when I first met him, he was completely present for me. He put himself aside, or it went aside because of his desire just to be present for me. That is, we can spend a life, and then he'd fall back into maybe Dick Alpert at some points, in his evolution, just like you with the guitar. No, you can't put it up there on the plane. So, but there's a whole lifetime of moving constantly in a way that you understand that ultimately that this somebody that we've created, it needs to be relinquished so that you can really be of service, and that's just a basic truism. So I think that the when you talk about the oneness of all these, they're all saying that thing. They are all saying that thing. And Maharaji every day we'd come there and he'd go like this. Only Sabek in Hindi. There's only one.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a constant day-to-day thing, that there is only one. And he'd say, Hanuman and Christ and Krishna, it's just one.
Yeah. And it's so funny what the ego does with that. Like we hear it and then we go, cool. So what do I need to do to be there? Right? Like, how do I get to the one? which is funny because there's only one. There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to be. There's no one else to be. But the funny thing about the ego is the ego is the movement of trying to be something else. It's oneness looking for some other oneness in some funny way. And that's what creates suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also easy for our minds to do real deep flip-flops around, there's only one. So just let's hang out here and we'll wait for it all to unfold, because there is only one and we are already there. We are that thing and we just don't so that's my I take a little bit of umbrage with the non-dual thing as a result, that you can ignore a lot of stuff with that up-leveling kind of thing. And then, of course, in our tradition, which is the bhakti, but it's mixed with Buddhism, like all these retreats we do, always have our Buddhists. We have them there as our backup, for straying into gooey stuff that we might do, the gooey hard stuff. But we have Jack Cornfield. He helps us out with that one.
That's funny.
So no, there's discrimination is a big deal, that for sure.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from where I come from with non-duality, it's non-duality has room for duality. It has room for the gooey and the prickly and the stoic and all of it. It's all just the one still.
Yeah. I think we have a new thing here. We could really, we'll trademark it. Okay. Can we be partners on the gooey and the prickly?
That's good, huh? My wife and I use that sometimes in our discussions, because she's a personality that tends more towards the goo, and I'm one that tends more towards the prickly. Sometimes those are interesting combinations. I think they're good when they're healthy. They're good. They're great combinations.
Good. So I like your poetry too, man.
Thank you.
I was really touched, actually. So the first little poem Michael wrote for this. Look at this book, by the way.
It took some work to get them to not put my name on the cover, and
I bet. And then you open it up into this kind of really cool,
psychedelic thing.
Yeah, psychedelic thing. I love that too. So anyhow, here, this. So this book is called this. This book is called this, which we have mentioned, or in my mind, it's another word for whatever we can't express. So let me read this, because I love reading poetry.
Yeah, thank you.
This is all there is. Yesterday and tomorrow are just wounds and stories. This is not all there is. There is also that. Desiring milk while you drink water. That is suffering. Of course, that is absurd, for this is all there is. Does this confuse you, beloved? Perhaps I could say it in a different way. If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, you are there.
You read that in a wonderful way. I loved hearing you read that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so just the idea of this, how did this come to you? This book.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I actually started writing the book, I think, at Ram Dass's house on the retreat. Yeah. So in 2017, in January of 2017, I went on a retreat to Ram Dass's house. And I had this experience of the dissolution of my sense of separateness. But I didn't quite, it was still kind of like, do I talk about this? How do I talk about this? Ought I talk about this?
This is before you went to see Ram Dass. You had this experience?
This is kind of in the time that I went to see Ram Dass. It was kind of like, what do I do with all of this? With this new experience? Because as a person who's talked very publicly about spirituality for my whole life, like there was something about this that was so plainly not speakable, ineffable. The Tao that can be named is not the true eternal Tao. And but then you have all these beautiful souls that speak, right? That try to speak of it, even though it's kind of futile to speak of it. So I'm like, should I? And how much, how much of, I was just kind of I don't know, I started jotting things down. And that retreat with Ram Dass that week was a beautiful experience for me. Um, we sat and I told him a lot of my story, and he really related to him as far as how Richard Alpert was this thing, right? It was like this. If Google was around back at the time, Google would have an idea of what Richard Alpert was, like, and that for me was this, like Michael Gungor it was not just my name as my brand, my job. It had a thing. Michael Gungor was the kind of cynical Christian musician and it had this feeling to it. And as a person who was constantly practicing remembering loving awareness, practicing remembering who I really am, sometimes the Michael Gungor, people just calling me Michael Gungor would be like, kind of throw me back. It was just, it had a feeling about it. And so Ram Dass, as we were talking about it, he's like, what kind of name would you like to have? Because I was like, sometimes Michael Gungor feels like, and I laughed. I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And he kind of leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and just waited for a while. And I could feel like ego coming in and going like, ooh, Ram Dass going to give you a name. I'm like, let's just say, hey, ego, let's just be here. This is a beautiful moment. So just kind of calm down and breathe and just sat there in it for a while he waited. And then finally he opened his eyes and goes, Vishnu Das. And he told me about Vishnu. And he said, he's seen me as a person, like I've lived so much of my life in my head, trying to figure all this out, trying to make all these constructs make sense together. He said, when you're in your head and your heart, and when those two join, there's Vishnu in this moment. And so then he went through and we just kind of sat in the moment and stared into each other's eyes and we're just present as loving awareness. It was gorgeous. And that name for me was really, it was a gift of grace, because for people that were really close to me, especially for 2017, 2018, kind of that zone, it was a helpful reminder for people that were close to me that kind of knew my spiritual journey, could call me that in a way that called me back to this moment, called me back to the reality of who I really am. And lovely enough, through all that time, the Michael Gungor thing doesn't hold the same weight for me anymore. It doesn't trigger. I needed like a little breath from with people really close around me. And I feel like the grace was there for that. The Vishnu thing was a beautiful gift. And it's still, some people still call me that. I don't feel like I need it like I did for a minute there. Michael is just as much part of oneness as Vishnu. Even though Michael's a constriction of oneness, but I don't have to identify with Michael anymore. Yeah.
Vishnu Das. Well, and you, well, it meant enough, so you put it as underneath underneath your English name. So, well, the only thing I would say to that is, because this all happened to me and many of us that were in India back in the day with Neem Karoli Baba, and I got my mother, especially, she was a problem. What do you mean? First of all, my name Raghu is a nickname off of the total name, which nobody can pronounce. Raghavendra Das is my real name. And even in India, I got on a train after I got the name, and some Indian people said, "What is your good name, sir?" And I said, "Raghavendra Das," and they went, "Huh? What?"
Really?
And I knew, okay, I'm screwed now. Okay.
Yes, they can't say it in India.
Yeah, no.
That's funny.
So it became Raghu, which, then it's the operator going, "Who? Raghu? Spaghetti sauce?" So I got that now.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, but you know what? In the end, my mother finally did
She
say,
did.
yeah, she surrendered and went, and she was a Marxist. So it was a bit of a real difficult thing. Uh, so, yeah. And it's so over the years, certainly, because when I was in the music business as well,
Hmm.
in Los Angeles for quite some time, and so did not use that name in corporate world,
Hmm.
and I have found it being somewhat of a rudder, and I can always go back to my English name,
Mm.
Bill Mitchell. He's a screw up. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
actually, Sharon Salzberg she uses, yeah, well, when things, I have negative thoughts or do something stupid or whatever, I blame it on Lucy. She has an invented name
Ah,
from where you can go, okay, that bullshit is just Lucy. Okay.
that's funny.
Yeah. So I don't know. You might try it on, Vishnu Das.
Oh, I love it. I have tried it on for sure. I love the name, but why I say I don't need it for a while, a lot of it is my family,
Mm,
friends that I can tell feel uncomfortable with the name. I'm like,
mm,
please
yeah.
save yourself the trouble. Like
Yeah.
if you can't, and that's just I'm just speaking for me.
Yeah. No,
And
I'm
what I've
I'm I'm
what I've
jiving you a little bit about that because it's it's I can completely see where it would have the opposite
Mhm.
effect, where people are now projecting woohoo-ness into
Yeah,
you. So
exactly.
I get it.
Yeah.
So the other thing with the book, the other thing I really kind of thought it's right up my alley, that you chop it up into the Four Noble Truths
Hmm.
and work through that. And I thought that is a real, as far as I'm concerned, real benefit for people in terms of realizing the reality of the Buddha and what he said. And um, can you recall? There's a couple of cool things. You have very early on a chapter around suffering, and you talk about two different kinds of suffering.
Hmm.
Short stories, suffering one and suffering two. Can
Hmm.
you recall it? And
I can, yeah. Yeah. So just kind of making in the book, I make the distinction between pain and suffering.
mm,
Um, and I tell two stories of one that really involves a lot of physical pain, but I think it was in 2016. I took some mushrooms and went to a flotation tank, uh, which they don't recommend to do at the flotation place, but I thought it'd be an interesting experience, and boy, it was. But I can't recommend it. It wasn't very safe because I got up afterwards and was a mess. Like I somehow got my clothes on, but I didn't dry off. I was all salty. I just walked outside and thought I could turn any car into an Uber to go. But on my way out, I mean, I was just in this blissed out oneness, total ego death. Um, and I ran into a glass wall on my way out and smashed my nose on it pretty hard. Just smashed my face right against the glass. And I can remember just no suffering whatsoever. There's all this pain, but the pain was just being read as sensation. Just like, wow, look at this. Look at all this color, basically, this physical color of sensation. So a lot of pain, no suffering. And then I told a different story, which was when I had some trace amount of blood in my urine and I had to go get it checked out. And they said they were going to have to take a look up in my bladder. And I was like, how do you do that? X-rays? Like, no, we're gonna have to
yeah.
physically go up there. I was like, I only know one way up there, and that's not something I would prefer you to do. Um, so they said, yeah, sorry, we got to do it. So I'm hoping the scope that they're going to have to put up my penis is going to be. I'm like, it's 21st century. We're going to have some good technology. That thing looked like fucking garden hose. It was ridiculous.
Everybody cringing out there. It's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay. And think about this, because most men after over 50 are going to be dealing with this shit. So,
Oh,
okay.
this is just preparing you to let go. But yeah, it was terrifying. And I can't say that the thing actually hurt that bad. Like the actual pain, if you would just compare it to, a bad headache, it probably wasn't that bad of pain. But it was there, and it's the fact that something foreign is going up a place that I don't want it to be. And so the suffering was like traumatically I went home afterwards and just like got in the fetal position. I was like, I hated it. I hated it. And so much suffering, even though not a lot of pain.
Right.
And so kind of making that distinction between pain is going to happen, right? Pain is part of a body living in an environment. Thankfully, we have a body that perceives patterns, perceives dangers and whatever else. So things happen in our bodies experience. Pay attention here. And that can be physical or mental. I think you can have sad days, but do you have to suffer on the sad day? I think you can make a distinction between if you're having a sad day and you don't want to have a sad day and you really cling on to, oh no, why am I having a sad day? I wish I was having a happy day. And then it just actually makes the problem worse. It kind of turns it into the cycle of suffering, because now there's pain, but now you don't want the pain. So that creates more.
Yeah.
And then you don't want it and you push it away, but it just creates more and more suffering. So I actually just kind of embrace and I just, a couple weeks ago, as the last few years I've been practicing with this, I had this burn on my calf. It was a really hard day, really sad. Like there was some financial stuff that happened in the morning, and then I tried to get a break from all of it. It was real stressful. Took a break with my girls and took them to Chuck E. Cheese's, but one of the cars had a flat tire. We have 2 cars. And then the other one broke down while we were there. So I had my little 5-year-old's going crazy and screaming, and it's really hot, and trying to get her home. So I call an Uber and end up leaving my wallet in the Uber while I was calling the tow truck.
Suffering is.
And I know the guy, I know it was in there, but we had $100 bill that was my daughter's birthday present from my mom in the wallet. So the driver, I think, saw that $100 bill and said, no, it's not in here. The wallet's not in here. Thing after thing. The tow truck comes. I burn my calf on the muffler of the tow truck. And it really hurts. And the guy just looks at me and is like, that'll wake you up in the morning. And it was, and as Ram Dass might say, it was grace. It was just so much grace that day. Thing after thing after thing of like, am I going to suffer over this? Am I going to grab onto this and be like, fuck no, give me, or am I just going to like, let this open me up? Whatever in my body is resisting this. And even that pain as I'm burning on my calf, it felt a little bit more like that, that float tank nose pain. Like it was a lot of pain, but it was just sensation. I noticed as if I didn't resist the pain, if I didn't want it not to be there, I just noticed it was sensation. It was a tremendous amount of sensation.
So this recalls to me a good friend of mine who actually works with Ram Dass in Maui. When was it? Last December in our retreat in Maui, we had Joseph Goldstein alongside of his compadre, Sharon Salzberg and Jack Kornfield, who basically brought Vipassana back to this, to the West, certainly to this country. And so my friend Matt was in the car driving Joseph somewhere, and he said, Joseph, if there's one thing that you could tell me as a young person on the path that would be most helpful, most efficacious, what would that be? And Joseph just turned to him and went, stop clinging.
Yeah. That's
Right?
it.
That's it.
It's the whole thing.
The whole deal. Okay, that was a great podcast. Thanks, Michael. It is all of it, though. It is all of it. But of course, and by the way, everybody out there, Joseph Goldstein has the best book on mindfulness. It's called Mindfulness. It's like thicker than it's a Bible. Okay, and Joseph can elucidate this stuff around mindfulness better than anybody I know.
Mm.
So that'll be in the show notes. You'll have a link. We've done this before. We can't recommend that book. I can't more highly. And in it is prescriptions. So there are prescriptions and antidotes to the clinging that we do, to the preferences, to the judgments, to all of it. And so certainly one that's very big in my mind, Michael, is the way in which we are so absolutely committed to the stories we tell ourselves. And in this book, you talk about that a lot. And that's, I thought, this is a real value, because once one understands how we do this and the way in which we are so caught in it, talk about clinging, it changes so much so quickly.
Yeah.
In so many different ways. So yeah, talk about your experience with believing in stories and believing anything you think.
Yeah, the believing the stories thing. I think especially, I don't know if you've heard of the Enneagram, but my sort of shape of ego wound is the Enneagram 5, which is trying to figure things out. And by figuring things out, and you can believe these constructs, you feel like you have a handle on the world. You feel like you have some control, and then that makes you feel valuable. And that's how I lived for most of my life, was like, if I just could get the right answers and just figure it out in my head, then I'll be okay, right? Then all the shit, all the shame stuff that I'm trying to solve, that I've tried to solve with religion and tried to solve with whatever, I just got to have the right thoughts, got to figure it out. And then the new belief comes. And for a little while, the new belief was oneness. I was like, if I can just, which is funny, it's like a real subtle ego game in there. Like, I believe that I have to have my ego dissolve. Right? Who's believing that? That's what's funny about it. Like, so when you're there has to be a believer for there to be a belief. So if you find yourself believing things, if you find yourself with really strong opinions that you're clinging to, like, well, this is how it should be, this is what ought to be, that then you already know the believer constriction is there, that oneness is already constricted into thinking that it's something other than oneness. So now I'm Michael Gungor, and my beliefs are really important and really true, and I can get all the mysteries of the universe into this little 3 pounds of meat in my head here. And so the belief can almost act as a good check engine light in a way. If I'm really clinging on to some stories, like, well, but this is the true way. And it's not to say that beliefs can't be useful and practically, it's not to say that one shouldn't have any assumptions. I think that's impossible. I don't know why would you eat if you didn't assume that it would help keep you alive? You have to make assumptions to move through the world. But when I'm talking about belief, it's kind of your internal relationship to those assumptions. Like, if the world presents itself in a way that your assumption makes you fight reality as opposed to flow with it. I don't know if that's kind of an ambiguous way of saying it, but then maybe you're clinging to that story rather than using it. So you can use stories as a way of floating down the river like a ball, like the Zen Buddhists say. You can use stories to cooperate with your environment and to survive and take care of people and notice things like racism and patriarchy and people being oppressed and abused, and you can see the stories of separateness. They're useful practically, But when you believe them down to the core, that's where the suffering, there's going to be suffering there, because now you're a believer rather than someone who's flowing with stories and seeing the stories as just part of the play that's going on within the oneness.
Yeah.
You actually start believing that that's how things are. And now you're cut off from your source.
Yeah. You say actually nicely in the book, story is what turns one into two, unity into difference. Story looks at an ocean and draws a line around part of its movement and says, let there be wave. Story is a prison through which a single beam of uniform sunlight becomes a rainbow of different colors. It can transform an amorphous ball of Play-Doh into a house or a world or 1,000 tiny Buddhas. And I think really well said. And I do think what you're saying, the real truth is in the spaciousness that we can have around belief in our thoughts, belief in our projections, belief in our attachments, belief in our desires, preferences, all of it. If there's a little bit of space, and go back to this movie. This is a good movie, by the way, Michael. Where are you? You're in LA?
Yeah.
Okay, September 6th in LA. Actually, come on the 8th, because I'll be doing a panel after.
Oh, cool.
Meet.
In LA?
Yeah, at the Lemley Royal.
Great.
West Hollywood. So in it, there, at one point, the whole screen is this gray, like, cloud, right? And that cloud represents all of the dark, negative thoughts and emotions and everything we're in fear of.
Yeah.
And then he talks about, so suddenly the frame expands a little bit, and then you see a little bit of blue in one corner. And that blue, from that blue sky, you go, oh, yeah, okay, that's a bunch of gray cloud, bunch of junk that's been rolling around in my head, and a bunch of fear and a bunch of separateness. Oh, wow. And you have, suddenly you're relating with that true place of awareness that we all have, that's going on all the time. But from that awareness, you get a little bit of spaciousness around being so absolutely glued by these negative thoughts and emotions and so on. So I love that that analogy. It's a great one.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And developing, which is again through mindfulness, is developing awareness, and through awareness we create spaciousness around the really troubling thing, around everything, but certainly those troubling things that we run into on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I think that mindfulness thing is so important. Just, I think from a distance, sometimes that people can wonder about how are all these things like mindfulness and oneness and things tied together. And I think that mindfulness, in my practice anyway, when you pay attention to your body right now, when you pay attention to what's happening right here and right now, it's harder to get lost in those stories, right? Like the stories that you're suffering with, they don't actually exist right now. Like as any sort of, when you're thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow, what happened yesterday, those things are not actually happening right now. And you're just lost in those moments, those illusory moments, rather than feeling what's happening. So if you're paying attention to sensation or to breath or to malas or whatever it is, you're paying attention to now. Sensations only happen now. So that mindfulness, when it comes back to the present moment, some of those stories kind of lose their power.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
There's one wild thing, by the way, in the book, which is a quote from your daughter, who at the time was 3 years old. Amelie?
Yeah, Amelie.
She said, there's blood in your heart, and Jesus is in the blood. Okay, I didn't even get to read the whole chapter. It's kind of where I got. One day, so it just tripped me into this thing I thought I had to mention to you. One day, Ramdas and I and Krishnadas and a few other people were sitting with Maharaji. He was like looking out. He was in a room looking through a window, a screen, and Ram Dass was lamenting over the fact that he felt completely impure. And Maharaji looked at him. What? No, what do you mean? You're not impure. I let you go peel potatoes in the kitchen. Like, only, of course, if you had lived in India, would you understand that with food, foreigners are not considered proper to be in a kitchen that's Brahmin, blah, blah, blah. It's all that stuff. Maharaji, all day long, he was cutting through all of that stuff. So he said that, and then he said, the same blood runs through all of our, the blood of Christ runs through all of our veins.
Wow.
So you're a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
That's so great. I love that.
Yeah, she's going to be she already is, but she's been asking the big questions since she was 3. Like, what is all of this? Since that question, that's the question that'll lead you to yourself eventually, usually, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, of course, we're just kind of at the end of this, our thing here. But towards the end, we talk about, to me, this is the final and great interpretation, although comes with a caveat for what this is. And the chapter is, this is love. And of course, I know that you are not talking about the transactional stuff that most of us assume when that word comes along. I like to use the word love with no cause to differentiate it a little bit. And Ram Dass, of course, uses unconditional because that's our experience. Once you see somebody absolutely knows every thought in your head and everything you've done, past, present, future, and is living in the universal consciousness, then it's hard for you, at that point, you're like, okay, I'm going to let that go. Just, and it ends up that love is there unconditionally is it's an incredible thing. And that experience, again, doesn't have to happen by going to India, as you yourself have experienced over these years. And so this is love, and that love is absolutely interconnected with everything, was the message that we got all the way back then when we went to India, and it's what we understand now. It's what we see now in terms of there's a lot of tough stuff going on in this world, and how people are really showing up, working on themselves and doing social action, and not thinking that they're separate. And there's much more unity within that. I really believe in next generation. I mean, you're a little further along than that, but you're not that far removed. So, it's quite a wonderful thing. This is love.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that love, I think for human beings, love is one of the more easy ways to dive into the heart of this. So like towards the end of the book, I tell the story about when the Buddha held up the rose as his wordless sermon. And like, here's all you need to see. This is all you need to see to get anything I would ever say. I won't say as much as this rose. Just look at it. Of course, he didn't say that. He just held it up. But so I think all of it can be found in any of it. And I think you see that in all the great teachers. I think that's why he used parables. He's like, look over here, look at the birds, look at the flowers. It's all here. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to see other than what it is. But for some reason, love, I don't know why, but as a human organism, it feels to me that's one of the easier entry points into that kind of dissolution of the separateness, right? It's
absolutely.
Like, so it kind of, love brings you out beyond your constrictions. But that's what everything's doing. Everything is constantly just the beingness of everything. You look at the flower, look at a cloud in the sky, look at whatever you can. If you pay attention enough to anything, you can see it all there. But love seems to be like a good introduction to this.
Well, it's our whole tradition is held within. Actually, it's I mean, as you know, if you've ever seen Krishnadas or heard of them, chant, the kirtan
Yeah.
we do is a big factor in our practice for
Yeah.
sure, and it's all about going, going into heart and having that open
Yep.
automatically. So, Hare Krishna, ISKCON, the Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. It's called the Maha Mantra, and as far as they're concerned, they're, they may do stuff that's a little bit like where you came out of in terms of there's only one way, but they say that, and it is said in India that opening the heart, the doorway to the unity is through the heart, and opening the heart is done through the repetition of the names of God. So, so that's what's espoused. And I was a few years ago. I was at a friend of mine brought me to one of their convocations up in the mountains of North Carolina, and it was just constant, nonstop, this mantra being repeated with different melodies and instruments. I mean, it was phenomenal. Then I finally, and one particular chant guy, his name is, and I'm telling you, we'll put a link up. Don't forget, guys, put a link up to Madhava Prabhu, because after hearing him and chanting with him, I almost became. I was going to join the cult. You're right. Just do the mantra. Stop thinking about all this shit, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
I was ready to join. Oh God, I'm gonna get burned at the stake.
Cults seem like a good time. I feel like I have a decent chance of joining a cult someday.
Yeah, you do. Well, maybe we'll go together.
Yeah,
let's do that. We'll do that together. It's much more fun. You go with a friend.
Yeah, go with a friend. Get out before the guns come out. Just get out before they start to.
But the reality is, also, this is from me personally to everybody. The reality of certainly using discrimination, using mindfulness, meditation is extraordinarily important to get some kind of space from being caught the way that we can get caught by our thoughts. At the same time, I recommend the practice doing some music. Well, Michael, you well know this, is an incredible way to allow the heart to open. And then if you add in that these mantras all have a certain resonance that's meaningful, and you can allow that to happen without doing too much thinking about it, it can be a powerful practice.
Yeah, I actually say in the book, looking back, I think my primary spiritual practice for most of my life was music.
Yeah.
Same thing with mindfulness. You can't make music if you're not in the moment. You literally have to stay in time, right? You have to stay in this moment. Otherwise you're rushing or you're dragging or whatever. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of music as spiritual practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a fun book, Michael.
Thank you.
And everybody, you're going to get links to this on that website.
Yeah.
BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling. You'll go there. There'll be show notes for all the stuff that we're talking about. And BecomingNobody.com is the place to go, everybody. It'll play through the fall in most places, the movie. And BecomingNobody.com, you can see where it's playing, and you can take a look at the trailer and all that stuff. This is 4 years in the making, but for me, it's more like 45 years making since my first meeting with Ram Dass, maybe even more, but it's getting too weird to talk about that kind of span of time. So I try not to.
But Raghu, you're the unborn, So
yeah, that's right. I need you to remind me about that. You'll send me a text every week, will you? Thanks again, Michael. It's been great. And everybody, this is Mindrolling on the Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com, where there's the plethora of amazing podcasts and teachers. See you next week.